Hey everyone, Rob from Southgate Media Group here. Before we get started with this podcast, we have a quick message. If this is your first time checking out the show, we love that you found us and we really hope you enjoy it. What we have to say is for the subscribers. If you enjoy our shows, would you please donate to help keep these going? We don't want to have to put traditional ads on these shows, but this does cost money. So we really do rely heavily on donations. To make a donation to the show, please go to our website, www.southgatemediagroup.com. Go to the page for the show, and in the upper right-hand corner is a donate button. It takes you right to PayPal, and you can donate whatever amount you want. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. And now, on with the show.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Kring. Download the podcast, Save the World.
Hey, Primatech peeps. Welcome back to the Primatech Files, a Southgate Media Group podcast dedicated to all things Heroes Prime and Heroes Reborn related stuff. I am Lilith and on the hunt for specials, evolved humans, twins, and trying to stop the Healy event.
It's me, Ricky. Hello.
So we have a special treat for you guys. We have an interview with Tim Kring.
Yay.
Pick your jaws up off the floor.
Hi, everybody.
Again, we just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us for.
Yeah, we'll just jump right in. Your TV career as a showrunner started with Strange World, if I remember right, which was like a sci-fi procedural hybrid. Then came like Crossing Jordan, which was like a hip, cool, kind of sexy twist on the medical examiner cop procedural. And then came Heroes in Touch, which definitely were both more about like the extraordinary and fantastical things, but still in a grounded way. So I say all that to say is, which style or genre do you prefer, or do you just like blending and blurring the lines between everything?
Boy, that's an interesting question. You know, I have to say I worked for many years, as a writer in Hollywood, taking assignments, doing, anything that I could get a job doing. So, when I first started out, I wrote a horror. My first job was writing an episode of Knight Rider.
Wow.
Then I wrote a horror film after that. I wrote the sequel to Teen Wolf called Teen Wolf 2.
Yes.
Then I wrote about a bazillion TV movies, because there was a big, giant TV movie business at the time. For anybody who's old enough to remember when that happened, there were TV movies every week. Every network, the big three networks had TV movies, and I wrote a bunch of those, and they would fall into different categories. They would be either, thrillers or what we'd call Disease of the Week movie. Some sort of crazy, true story about someone surviving a disease. There were kind of like, man's inhumanity towards, or revenge of nature against man's, hubris, those kind of stories, there were like, animals attacking kind of thing. The point is I did every kind of show that I could ever, in any genre that you could think of, because I was just a writer for hire. And, I think that really kind of got me, sort of prepared for, or it also created a kind of short attention span where I didn't want to do the same thing twice. So when I wrote a thriller, I wanted to do something different after that. And when I first started writing for series television, I started writing, on the show Chicago Hope. And so I wrote, surgery scenes and all that kind of stuff, and melodrama. So the truth is I have really just gone where my interest took me at the time. And you never really think of something lasting for a really long time. In my career, you think of it as just a short job. And then you also think that you're going to be able to reinvent yourself, again afterwards. But when something is successful, then people know you as that. And it may not be completely accurate as to, I'm obviously known in the sci-fi world, I guess, if with Heroes, but a very big chunk of my background was not writing stuff that was in sci-fi.
I read your book Shift, and I just was curious, like, how that came about. Were you friends with Del Peck, or is that like a pairing that Crown Publishing suggested?
That was a pairing, that not Crown, but we shared an agent, and so we were introduced by our agent, and then we sold it. Once we went out and pitched it to a bunch of publishers, and Crown ended up buying. But it was that was a really fun project, and the book world is something I don't really know a lot about. So somebody like Dale that really did know a tremendous amount. But it was it kind of rode a little bit in the genre of sci-fi, because it was an alternate telling of the JFK assassination, with the idea of LSD being actually a part of it, which is kind of a complicated story. But the CIA was very involved in LSD studies for many years under a program called MK Ultra, and for anybody who really knows anything about the JFK era and the assassination, there are many rumors that the CIA had some involvement in that. And so we took that basic premise of the LSD studies and the JFK assassination and kind of merged them into a thriller story.
I enjoyed it. Do you ever plan on writing another book?
I'd love to. It's obviously very time consuming. But no, I mean, I would love to, and I have other ideas, but what happens is you get involved doing, these shows, and they become really all consuming for several years of your life.
Okay, I want to know if this is true or not, just because it's been stated repeatedly that the inspiration for Hiro, a hero who was actually excited about his powers and going on about a hero's quest, was your wife's idea. Is there any truth to that?
Well, yeah, technically, yes. So what happened was I had written the first draft of the script, and we were, it was right before I sort of turned it into the network. And I, let my wife be the first one to read it. And her comment, when she read it was, she said, wow, everybody is so, conflicted about their powers. They're just, it's like an affliction rather than anything that anybody is excited about. And wouldn't it be great if you had, like one character who just totally thought their power was fantastic, and rather than, because the basic, the original idea of Heroes was, what would happen if real people ended up with powers? In other words, if you were, you had some crappy job somewhere and you were trying to, date, you were kind of, playing the field and trying to date, and you had a sick mother and a job you hated, and, all that kind of stuff. And you found out that you woke up one day and discovered that you thought you could fly. That to me was kind of there was an interesting drama in that idea of how do you reconcile your life against this idea of having these extraordinary abilities. And so when I wrote the first draft, every single character sort of came at it from that. Like, if you thought you could fly, you would probably think you were probably crazy, or, you wouldn't want to jump off a building quite yet. But, you might think you have an inner ear problem or something. So you go to the doctor, or you go to your shrink, or, and you would treat it as something that's not right with you. So anyway, so it was my wife who suggested, why don't you come up with a character that really, loves this? And, when we started talking about it, it was like, what about one of those manga, guys in Japan that just lives for the whole idea of, And so, yes, it was ostensibly my wife's idea. Hiro Nakamura was my wife's idea.
Well, we'll send her a muffin basket every year then. Has she sparked any other creative decisions on any of your other shows or projects, past, present, or yet to be released?
Oh, listen, she is sort of the first line of defense in terms of like when I write something, especially when I write something on spec. And so, I have to say that those conversations that are closest to home actually do influence you. You kind of can't help it. And she's always been a really good judge of my work. And so, yeah, I think there's probably been countless times that she's, contributed in some way.
Heroes and Heroes Reborn are known for like their multi-platform storytelling. How hands-on are you with the process of, the graphic novels, the games, and even like back in the day with the online gaming kind of aspect of it all?
It sort of depends. There are things that I actually am more hands-on and more, when we first started this whole thing of multi-platform storytelling, it was really not, kind of a genius rocket science kind of thing. It was really trying to figure out how to tell story where people were. The audience was starting to migrate off of watching traditional television. As we all know, it's been harder and harder for traditional television to capture viewers, especially viewers that are tech savvy and are consuming content in different ways. And so we just thought, well, why don't we tell story wherever they live? They seem to be on these new mobile devices that people had back in the day. And they seem to be on their computers and they were playing games. So why don't we just fish where the fish are and tell story where people are? And so I was very involved at the beginning with the whole idea of the online comic books. And a lot of this, it's really important to know that whether it's me personally or not, one of the things that we wanted to do, and we still, I think, have stuck with, even when it's gotten big and complicated, is that the creative content that is generated that the audience gets to see, we try to make sure that is all generated from the creative engine room of the show, which is the writer's room. So even if it's not the writers themselves who are writing the comic books, most of the time they are involved heavily in it. The writers are, a lot of the assistants, the writer's assistants who are writers themselves wanting to become writer in Hollywood, were involved in those. But we always wanted there to be a real direct line from the writer's room to the audience. And there is a sense of authenticity to the show itself and to the creators of the show that we never wanted to mess with. It is a very thin line, thread that connects you to your audience, and it can't be severed by, it can be severed by any sense of inauthenticity from the people. So yes, and this, we have these games that are being launched. And both of them were generated, with writers very much involved. I was involved, but the writers were involved. We had two writers from the writers' room who were, involved almost on a daily basis in those games.
Awesome. Touching on the writer's strike, that obviously had a major impact on season 2 and a change in the original plan for it. And obviously a bit of season 3 as well. I believe I've read somewhere that season 3 was meant to be called Exodus and feature a character named Howard LeMay. What do you remember the original plan?
Oh yeah, Howard LeMay. Well, listen, season 3 was actually meant to be 3 different volumes. And we only got to do one. The volume ended after Generations, which was I think 11 episodes. Then I think Exodus was going to be 7, I think, episodes. It was 7 or 8. And then the last volume was meant to be 6 episodes. So, one of the things that I don't believe that the audience really ever, it was a very frustrating thing, but the audience never really got on board with this idea of the volumes. Well, partly because, I think one of the mistakes that there was one mistake and then coupled with one reality that I think had I done it over, I think I would have had volume 1, Genesis. I would have probably had it end a few episodes earlier so that you got used to the idea that there was a second volume in season 1. That way the audience would have understood. But we basically, volume 2 started, in the last 30 or 40 seconds of the season, which was a cool idea, but the audience, I don't know if they ever grasped the idea that there were, 2 volumes in that first season. And then the writer's strike kind of screwed us up because the audience would have very clearly in the second season gotten the idea that there were actually 3 more volumes. And the whole goal behind that was, serialized storytelling is a very dangerous, thing to embark on, because you can lose audience, when the story gets very complicated and wrapped tightly around itself. The audience can feel less and less, welcome. New audiences, can feel less and less welcome in. And so the idea of doing the volumes was to allow the show every once in a while to stop the story and, as I say, pull into the train station and let new viewers get onto the train. And it was also a chance for us creatively to change things up, to have shorter runs that would allow us to cast new people, which, when you cast certain caliber of actor that doesn't want to sign up for years and years and years on a television show, but will come and do, a handful of episodes or 7 or 8 episodes. It also allowed for that. It allowed for us to try new things visually. If you pay really close attention, the volumes all had a slightly different visual take on them. We used sometimes, different lenses. We used different color palettes. So it was just a chance to try and keep things fresh, not only for the audience, but internally as well.
Yeah, and there was also going to be Heroes Origins,
yes.
I believe,
yes.
wasn't there, in between that as well? Did you manage to get any of the treatments for that before?
We didn't really have treatments, but we had a handful of people coming in and pitching. We had meetings with Kevin Smith and Eli Roth and John August, and there were some really interesting people that were interested in that. That was a big regret about the writer's strike for me, was that really put the kibosh on that idea. And we never really were able to come back. It was so difficult to mount the show, 10 or 11 months after the writer's strike, that we never got back on that horse. I still think it's a great idea, the idea of the one-off, because, the origin story is such a fantastic part of especially, when you're dealing with a sort of more reality-based idea of ordinary people discovering that they're extraordinary. You can do so many fabulous stories, and then to tell those stories through the lens of a different writer and a different director was really I very much grew up on the anthology TV, Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and all of those. And so the thought of being able to do that kind of anthology storytelling was really exciting to me.
I'm sure you've been asked this question quite a lot of times, but which character did you kind of relate to in, obviously, Heroes, the original show, and now in Heroes Reborn?
There have been a handful of different things, but I have to say I think originally the first character that I came up with was Peter Petrelli. And to me, that character did represent sort of the heart of it, in terms of, the dreamer, very much related. It's no sort of secret or whatever revealing thing to say that I was sort of a dreamy kid. I'm a writer, and I was sort of the dreamy kid that sat in the back of the classroom and daydreamed. At the very beginning, related to that Peter Petrelli character, the idea of, wondering, the character wondering, where life was going to take him, and kind of at the mercy of, of the muse, and the family order thing was very relatable to me, with the, having the older brother that was successful and all that stuff I very much related to. But, along the way, I got to sort of see myself in a lot of the characters. And I think that there was some Hiro Nakamura that I saw myself in. Very much saw myself in HRG's character, the only non-powered member of the cast, that was, the undying, having raising small kids at the time, very connected to the idea of the undying commitment to his daughter. And so I don't know. There, when you write, you obviously find things that connect you to everybody. But I would have to say that Peter Petrelli from the very beginning was obviously his character changed and morphed in different ways when he became more in control of who he was and the powers. Then he's his own person. But at the very beginning, there were certainly elements of my personality, I think, were in his character.
So let's talk about bringing back Heroes. How long were the discussions in kind of bringing it back with the network? We've heard rumours that obviously the day of the Olympic trailer was the day that it actually got greenlit. Is there any truth in this?
Well, it's pretty close to that. I mean, obviously they needed to have a deal connected before they could announce it. But it wasn't long before that they came to me. It was within a week or two before that we started having serious discussions about it. But there had been some ongoing discussions internally for actually a very long time, and partly because the truth is that Heroes broke a certain kind of, it had the audience for Heroes, the original Heroes, when we went off the air, we were, the number one most calendar year on full calendar year that we were on the air. Heroes was the number one most downloaded show in the world. And that was above all the other hit shows at the time, and we were one of the most streamed shows, by far, Hulu and iTunes and all those, and Netflix. We were one of the top DVR'd shows, time-shifted shows that people were watching. And we sold close to 2 million units of DVDs in our last season of the show. And when we were canceled because our ratings had fallen. And, the truth is, I think a lot of the reason why the ratings had fallen was because we were the most downloaded show in the world and one of the most streamed shows in the world, and sold 2 million units of DVDs. The audience was very potent, and very big around the world for the show. But a lot of them were watching the show on other platforms and in other ways. And so, that I think internally for NBC there was some discussion to be had about that. What do you do with a brand that has, real loyalty and a very large audience still there and available? What do you do with it in a world where you make money by selling advertising time? And so cut to several years later, you can now count a lot of these viewers watching it in other ways. And the advertisers are now, letting you factor in these, what are called Live Plus 3 or Live Plus 7 ratings, meaning, people that are watching on different platforms and time shifted are now counted by the advertisers as viewers. And so suddenly that audience that was savvy enough to find the show when they wanted it and where they wanted it could now be counted. And so that's partly why the discussion had been going on all these years.
What inspired Evernow?
Which part? The idea of a character that could enter a video game? Well, it's kind of a long evolution, to talk about. I actually wanted to do a character that it came from me wanting to do a character that we could animate. And so I actually originally thought about a character that was just fascinated with manga, and we started with thinking about a character maybe who could draw themselves into a comic book, basically. And as writer room discussion goes, we kicked that idea around for a few weeks, and it just kept morphing and morphing and morphing. And we ended up with the idea of a character who could enter a video game. And then we started thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting if the character really was from a video game, not a real character? It's hard to sometimes kind of parse out how things get created, but I can tell you that I had this thought of wanting to do a character that was animated. I wanted part of the show. I wanted part of the show to even if it was just a small part, I wanted it to be animated. And then, some of the challenge, we had actually talked about this in the original Heroes. But it was so expensive to do. The whole idea of motion capture and all of that was very expensive to do. And in the intervening years between when the show ended and now, it actually got cheaper to do. And so we started thinking about this months and months before we went into production, and came up with a workflow that allowed us to shoot a lot of this stuff months before the episodes were shot. And so, and it's why there's so little of it in the show, but because it's extremely difficult and has to be done months and months ahead of time. But I was looking for a way to change some of the visual style of the show, and I thought it would be visually, kind of arresting and interesting to have at least some of the show live in an animated world.
I love the way that Heroes and Heroes Reborn, and basically the character of HRG, you've brought them back, but they're totally different contexts to them. So it kind of makes it fresh and new. Was it difficult coming back to create the world after so long? And the darkness of the new show, was that a bit of pressure from like how TV landscape is now, or was it just a natural progression of where you wanted to go with the story beforehand?
Well, I do think that by darkness you mean the sort of like
the hunting and everything like that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I mean, listen, we left. It really came from a kind of, for me, it was a logical extension. We left the series at a really opportune place. I mean, when you really think about it, in the last seconds of the last episode of the series, Claire Bennett basically ostensibly outs herself to the world as having these powers. And the idea being that when we came back for a fifth season, originally that was what I think, because we did not know we were canceled when we showed that. So I did not know that was going to be the end of the series. But looking back, it was a very perfect place to end the series, because it allowed you sort of you really only had two forks in the road. I mean, one fork in the road. You really only had two ways to go. You could either come back and the world had accepted these people and they were stars and hiring themselves out to the highest bidder and having shows on the Vegas Strip or whatever it is that they're doing, as people with powers would do, ruling the world or whatever. Or the other way was that the world, human nature being human nature, sadly we don't like things that are different than us. We just don't. And that's the human nature of it. That the world had rejected this, and that when we came back 5 years later, we'd had 5 years of the world living with people with powers and realizing that these people were now not only rejected, but now hunted and exploited and persecuted. And to me, there was a lot more drama in that version. As a storyteller, it gave you a lot of drama, like you can really tell a story from that place. And so that coupled with the idea that sadly the world has progressed in the last 5 years, and where the first show was very much, and I've talked a lot about this, wanting to put a message into the world about hope and interconnectivity and global consciousness, and this idea that if we all pull together and come together, we could figure out how to save the world. That was a very important part of the message for me. And here we are, many years later, after that was, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, basically, when that message was the one that I wanted to put into the world. So if there was kind of a warning bell at the time, we need to save the world to come together, it's turned into an alarm bell now. And so I think the idea that it's a darker world is now reflects my own kind of desire to ring a more of an alarm bell, that we really have to take this very seriously. And so, but again, this is one volume. And should we get a chance to do another volume, there'll be a very different story and most likely a very different tone to that story.
Carrying on from that answer, I believe that you always had the idea for it to be an anthology and always kind of have a different kind of rotating kind of cast type thing every season. if we do get a season 2, would you continue the story that you're currently doing, or would it be more of an anthology?
It'll be decided by the parameters of what they want, when they want it, how, all that. But the short answer is, I like this idea that the cast members from the old get to float into a new story where you get to know new people. I think the show, I think the fans love the characters that they love. We really want the fans to be happy, but at the same time, the brand of I think has to also expand. And in order to expand, you have to sort of bring in new characters and repopulate. It also allows for us to there are some characters that work really well with the audience, and we want to make sure that those characters find a way back in. And some that I don't know that the audience would mind, frankly, one way or the other if they're not there. So I think there's always room to repopulate. How much is really, we're not completely sure. But I do like that idea that for me, the premise has always been very elastic, very broad premise. An indeterminate number of people around the world who are waking up to these powers, and then you have a unique story about it. And to me, that's always been the strength of the brand, that it wasn't just about one family or one set of characters.
I really like the fact that even though you've brought back the original characters, they're not how we last met them. They've evolved and changed over the 5 years that we haven't seen them. I really like the fact that they're different but yet still the same. Also, we're just saying, me and Lilith love the Fradys, so
Henry was really that was a fabulous find for us. He's one of those actors who just brings so much, his sort of comedy chops and all of that just make it really, really fun. He's a great character.
And we think he's got, like, both of them together, like, now they're back together, even though they're essentially the evil Frady cats is what we call them. We still are great fans of them. So yeah. And
Henry, the Quentin is it's a really, it's a very tried and true character, the sort of conspiracy nut who then gets himself embroiled in something that's real,
So we're just kind of going to start wrapping up. So what can you tell us about Heroes Reborn that you haven't said in any previous interviews and won't get you Haitian'd or Caspar'd, so to speak?
The truth is we've now aired 9 episodes. So obviously I can start pointing to the idea that there's a future that's 7,950 years ahead of us. And, I could never talk about all that stuff. And I could never really talk about Erica Crowded's evil plan to jump people into the future and all. And, we had to hide all of that stuff. But now that the audience knows, I can actually answer any questions about that. But, listen, one of the fun things about Heroes Reborn was just how wild the story is. We wanted to do something that was, frankly, took people on a journey that they never saw coming. From the basement scene in the church, in the opening teaser of episode 1 to, the end of episode 9 where, Katana Girl has somehow ended up 7,957 years in the future, and there's a strange city that's been built by an evil, corporate CEO. And you've had characters that, like Caspar'd, who can put your memories in a penny, and a character like Katana Girl can jump in and out of a sword wield, badass, video character. These things are, I have to say, it is so fun to be able to be that liberated when you tell the story. We wanted to sort of be just on the edge of being like too crazy sometimes, because we think that makes for really fun storytelling and keeps the audience really guessing. And I have to say, it's been really a wild ride. This has been a bigger, more complicated show than the original Heroes to produce. We've shot in different those scenes that you saw at the end of. We literally sent a film crew to Jordan, shot in the same exact location where Lawrence of Arabia was shot, we shot the beautiful snow scenes. We're in Iceland, out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, so we've really done some crazy stuff. We sent Robbie and Gatland, Emily and Tommy to France with a small unit and shot there. And so, it's just been really one of these wild adventures. The show was shot in Toronto, which is, 3 hours time difference and close to 3,000 miles away from our offices here in LA. So that's added to the complication of the show as well. But no, I mean, it's just been really, I think, I can tell you that the last 2 episodes, we shot the episodes in 2 episode blocks. So that 12 and 13 were shot by one director in a continuous block. And they're the 2 most ambitious, craziest, most ambitious, biggest production value episodes that I've ever been involved with. So you can look forward to some pretty giant scenes. Stuff that I didn't think we would be able to.
You keep on saying giant, and I'm thinking that we're literally going to get a giant. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. No, I'm joking.
This isn't Game of Thrones, Ricky.
You know what? There might be giants. Let me just go ahead and say that.
Awesome. So we'll just finish off with this. Do you want to say anything to the fandom?
Oh, listen, the only thing I really have to say to the fans is just a giant thank you. It was because of their continual support of the show that we, that the powers that be at NBC, wanted us to come back, was because there was a continual simmer of support by the fans. And, Heroes fans have always been really smart and really, fast and really immediate. And that immediate feedback loop that we all have with the fans is exhilarating. And, we'd love nothing more than to come back and tell more story and set it in a, unique and different worlds that keep people surprised and excited. I hope you enjoy the last few. We air our fall novel this week, and then we're off until, so don't go away.
Definitely won't.
Don't forget about us over the holiday breaks.
We won't let them.
We're going to do a couple of rewatches.
And NBC will run a few reruns as well to keep you.
Well, that was our interview with Tim Kring. We hope you found it entertaining and informative. And until the next time we reconvene, Ricky, do the thing.
Download the podcast, save the world.